I'm going to try to paint a picture both chronologically of my personal exploration, but try to make it relevant and tell you a bit not only about the hobby of rocketry, how 3D printing can offer some really interesting opportunities that I haven't seen others explore yet in rocketry, and perhaps an entirely new use case for 3D printing that at least I haven't heard from others. And then, of course, move to some of the bigger stuff, do-it-yourself satellites, what SpaceX is enabling and such. I'm on the board of SpaceX, so I'll try not to say anything untoward about them. In fact, they make rocket kits. The fairing we printed and custom made to make it look like a more recent version, but they actually make and design their own rocket kits, so they are a model rocket company as well. So my personal exploration of rockets started when my son was 3. We went to a local hobby store, back when there were hobby stores. That kind of dates me. There actually was a hobby store in San Antonio Road. And my son's the guy in blue, bottom, center, tiny. That's where we started, neighborhood kids. This is the way a lot of folks start in rocketry, right? You just seek forgiveness. You launch something, gets lost in a tree about 30 to 50% of the time, depending on the trees in the neighborhood, and that can be frustrating. So the key to getting beyond that is to have a launch event, a club, somewhere where not only you can find people that know more than you, but you can have actually a sanctioned launch where the police won't shut you down and you can feel free to launch without being questionable or marginal. In fact, I've looked up our city code where I live, and they actually say no fireworks and no torpedoes. But there's no rule against rockets, and so far I haven't been arrested. But we've moved on to bigger things, so we moved to better places. This is NASA Ames, for anyone in the Bay Area, very recognizable. Hangar 1 when it still had skin. And these are in order, so again, my kids bottom left have gotten a little bigger, and the wife's holding one of our Aerotech rockets. So anyone who wants to move up from ESTEs, either to rediscover rocketry, if you did it in your youth and now you're coming back to it, or your kids want to do something a little cooler than just paper rockets, there's a company called Aerotech that makes a whole slew of what are called mid-power rockets, things you can launch without permits or permission. You can just buy them over the internet. And then as you get bigger, there are, as you'll learn, all kinds of levels of certification you go through to launch the big stuff. The cool thing about NASA Ames is it's one of the only, if not the only, legal place in the Bay Area to do sanctioned launch events. And this is a big problem nationwide, the not in my backyard problem. All right? Everyone would like their kids to launch rockets, but not near their roof or their fire hazard area, right? No one really wants it in their backyard. And in fact, every one of the neighborhoods that says not my neighborhood has actually pushed rocketry out to the outskirts of Livermore. Even then we got shut down. And it was actually an email to Pete Warden, the director of NASA Ames here, that sort of sparked his remembrance of how important rocketry was, the obvious semantic tie-in to things that NASA does. And he made it possible to actually launch rockets once a month through this group called Lunar. Lunar.org is the website. It's the largest rocketry club in America, and every month you can go out there on the tarmac, and sometimes there's fighter jets scrambling and other things. It's kind of amazing that we can pull off rocket launches on an active airstrip. I was here at Maker Faire in 2007 and 2008 showing the next stage. So we got a little bigger. That's my partially finished sledgehammer horizontal on the table. And I met up with these guys, Tom Atchison and Dick Matthews, who you also see here. They started an organization called Rocket Mavericks. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the rockets in the background, not the ones in my hand, but the ones that are sort of vertical, those are some pretty sophisticated rockets. It was at this point in my life where I sort of vowed to my son and I that we would not go that crazy, that we would sort of stop short of that insanity. But we were building this big thing with onboard electronics, which you have to do as you scale up, and they go in that bay. But you can sort of see it work in progress. And here it is launching in the upper left corner for the first time when I got my level 1 certification, the process you go through. And then a series of launches. Actually, now I think I've launched this more than any other sort of person that's built this kind of kit. It's been about 9 successful launches to date, all different kinds of propellant. You can add metal salts, it's actually crazy to make your own rocket propellant, so don't do that. But you can purchase rocket propellant with metal salts in it that either create an incredible red glow from the plasma that's ionized in the gases, or pink, or whatever you might want. You get some beautiful views. You can see the clouds over this place called Snow Ranch out here in the Sierras. Computer simulation in the bottom center, we use programs called RockSim to figure out how high a rocket will go, will it be stable before you fly it, which is a good idea. It's a very inexpensive program, and it can really teach you what the trade-offs are. In fact, it's a great science fair project to do via simulation, which is, what makes a rocket go high? Is it weight? Lightweight would help. Is it skinniness? Is it aerodynamics in some other sense? And I won't spoil the surprise because it's actually not obvious what will make the biggest difference of the variables you could modify. In the center, you can see the readouts that come from various flight computers you can fly that actually tell you exactly how high you went, what your maximum G were, and basically the performance of the flight, which as a feedback loop is really wonderful and to be able to compare. So for most of our flights, we've been flying electronics until we got to 3D printing, and I'll explain that later. We then explored the minimum diameter, meaning how high can you go? Well, being a skinny rocket helps, being carbon fiber materials helps, and one of the things we learned in this process is carbon fiber layup, fiberglassing, and such. And in general, if you try to make a rocket as skinny as it can be, keeping the fins on is a challenge. And we took this rocket, called the Mongoose 98, to Mach 2, over Mach 2, 4 times in a row. Each time we kept pushing a little bit, and we found that around Mach 2.5, it just completely disintegrated. It's what we call a rapid unscheduled disassembly. It's where it just turns back into every constituent part prior to its assembly. In fact, every Duracell battery was separated and flung across the playa. And we collected all the scraps, and we have reassembled it, and it's a bit of a Frankenstein, but we will fly it again this summer. But things we learned are fin alignment are essential when you're going supersonic, and I'll come back to that in 3D printing. Keep that in mind, because you can get perfect fin alignment with a 3D printer. When you do it with normal methods, you have to have a special jig, and it takes just an insane amount of time to attach your fins. So take that as a given, especially if you want to go fast. By the way, you can sort of see how big we are, bottom photo. So that is like an 80-foot plume of fire coming out of the back of that rocket. But it's mainly for visual effect, just to explain. That is not actually the thrust. That's mainly the bright area up top. That's a bunch of sort of afterburner combustion. Basically, it's spewing out titanium sponge, which gets white hot, kind of like those sparklers. You remember back when 4th of July sparklers were legal? It's like spewing that out as a fire hose. And it's quite a spectacle. That's broad daylight, obviously, and it makes an incredible noise as well. In the center one, you can see the shock rings of a clean burning propellant. That was the blue baboon propellant that actually shredded the rocket before I repaired it. And each of these photos of my son, for over 11 years now, we go to the Black Rock Desert every September, where they have the best events and the best weather. And they have some that are welcoming of kids called XPRS, and then some that are definitely not welcoming of kids called balls, where they literally say on the website, you can only launch things here that are illegal elsewhere. So if it's legal in California, it can't fly, which is, I like it as a sort of a criteria. So some V2 projects, those are notoriously hard to fly, as the US learned when they first launched one in the White Sands. And if you don't have a warhead equivalent in the nose, they just go crazy. And when they come back, they do make that sound, which I've sickeningly experienced on the second flight of that big one. My son fit inside that rocket prior to launch, and parachute spinning, just for a skill. One cool thing in the bottom left, I wish I would put more slides. I was actually going to bring it just to show, but he designed that rocket in the bottom left just from scratch. And this is what you can think about is, how might I make a cool rocket no one's tried before? Put a rocket engine at each fin tip. And that led to a whole series of engineering challenges around how do you deal with if one lights before the other, because that could be wildly unstable if they're at the fin tips. But when it does work, it's this incredibly weird looking thing with a wide skirt of fire coming out of a very skinny rocket. And in fact, there's a central big, long moon burning motor that's lit by the onboard computer that kicks into gear, and it just screams out of town. If anyone wants to Google Epic Rocket, my last name, and YouTube, you'll see some incredible videos of his flights, because we always strap on video cameras. Which, oh, by the way, I don't know if you can see it, not really well, but even on that V2 around the 12-inch diameter frame, I just duct tape little video cameras to almost every rocket, and I find that 2 straps of duct tape, as long as they go all the way around, will hold on even through supersonic flight if you get the high temperature duct tape. And I learned there are different temperature grades, and 3M makes a high temp one that can survive the heating of a supersonic flight. At night in the desert, by the way, you'll see more stars than ever before. By the way, most of these photos are photos I've taken, so the combination of rockets and photography are wonderful. You see a lot of stars. That's in the Black Rock Desert when there isn't a lot of dust kicked up by Burning Man. And the one on the right was an incredibly lucky shot. It's my rocket, actually, as the moon is rising, because I put the tripod in place ahead of time. But it had a spectacular failure. My only time I've ever had the forward closure melt, where the aluminum case holding the entire motor together just melted through because of some O-ring failure or liner failure. There's not enough left to tell which. But what you see is the green propellant going up, then the unstable moment, the body falls out of sight, but the nose cone has blinking lights coming back by parachute back to the playa. This whole thing's about a half mile of height, just to get a sense. It's a very wide-angle lens. Okay, now to 3D printing. And this, by the way, is chronologically. So we went to all these big things, but then we got a 3D printer, and we're like, well, what do? We looked at Thingiverse, and there's a rocket. So we printed rocket components that someone else designed. You may recognize this. We flew it at NASA Ames, straight as an arrow. But the challenge, there were a few challenges. First, this was our first print, and just learning how to deal with MakerBot. This was our learning experience. But secondly, it's very brittle material. For everyone who knows or worked with PLA, when it lands on the tarmac, even under parachute, it breaks something. And so our first 2 or 3 attempts with anything 3D printed and rocketry led to shattering on landing. And that's when the light bulb went off that maybe we could work with that thought. And I'll get back to that in a moment. The other thing we learned here is that the body tubes, the clear portion, there's no reason to print those. That's just kind of silly. The thing that is complex are the fins, and those cones are easy to either buy or, as I'll show you, just use a golf ball, and it works great for certain size diameter frames. It tends to be self-centering. So we kit bashed together a few of these SpaceX kits into a Falcon Heavy, and what's hilarious is the photo on the right, when it's like on a cell phone size, it looks like the Falcon Heavy really launched. And when I showed it to Elon Musk, he just couldn't believe it. It's like, how did you do that? Is it Photoshop? And so that was a point of pride that we could do a model. You know, some people like to create the perfect replica of something. That's an art form in rocketry. And the whole fairing is 3D printed. This particular one, because again, it's shattered on landing, is a combination where we're starting to realize that the coupler is all we needed to print because of the weird sizes. We took this off the SpaceX schematics, what they have online, to get the fairing right. This, in real scale, a Greyhound bus would fit inside of that vertically. So then we're thinking, okay, this stuff keeps breaking. What can we do about this? Well, we could try to make it stronger, which I'll show you how we do. But also, I started thinking about a different category of rocketry, going back to the early days with the kids, where you launch something in the neighborhood and you might not see it again. What if we could think about disposable rocketry, one where you don't mind if it goes away? Because our prior expedition had been onboard GPS devices, computers, incredible amount of electronics you don't want to lose. What if you didn't mind losing it? And so we started, and just maybe focus on the things in the background. This was a random photo, but it's the only one I had in my random stuff I've printed. Well, actually, that's a metal print from someone else in the back corner, but the other PLA stuff, everything from cufflinks to gears. So the only original design are those, and of course, complexity is free when you 3D print. You could just add the hearts or the diamonds. Just, it's easy. It doesn't take any effort, and you just keep hitting print. We've added, let's see if this laser works, little guides to put on a 1-inch rail or tubes if you have a rod. So we have, in every print, 2 different types of launch support. And here's the thing that's most important, and maybe I'll just show the real thing to show you. Your fin alignment comes for free. Every print, they're perfectly aligned, they're attached. I had fillets in the print. So my son and I just sort of do what we do normally with rockets, but make it better. But make it all one print. So just keep adding more and more to our single design, but then every time we print, we can print a new one. We estimate the total cost of materials and energy to be $1.82 per print. So if it breaks on landing, just put a new one on, right? If you lose the rocket, you haven't put hours of labor. In fact, the entire assembly of a rocket now is less than 10 minutes because it's just 5-minute epoxy. If it's going to go supersonic, we lather a coarse print with 5-minute epoxy. Just lather it and let it dry. It's almost like fiberglass. We have these mixed materials of the PLA, plastic, and the epoxy. It's incredibly strong. And as I'll show you in a moment, it did survive a Mach 1.9 flight, which is just straight off MakerBot with epoxy. The other thing I realized is they're so fast. When you're this small and you're going almost Mach 2, you'll never see it. I mean, no matter what kind of parachute you have in there. And so I gave up on finding them. In fact, I just put my cell phone number on there, and I've gotten them all back, 100%. 4 launches out of 4. Someone else does the recovery. It's been a golf superintendent who's like, yeah, I found this in my golf course. Didn't care. He's like, fine. And just in case of environmental things, these are biodegradable. This is a paper-based phenolic it's called Blue Tube. I highly recommend it. It's very lightweight, came from the munitions industry, and makes it easy. And in fact, we don't even fly plastic nose cones. And I just couldn't find one to show us the demo. A golf ball fits perfectly and is self-centering, and it gives you nose weight, and it's free, because if you're near a golf course, you get tons of range balls. And I just figure we're returning the balls to the golf course. We launch on 4. Yeah, on the countdown. And so that works really well. Let me just show you a couple launches. Well, actually, we simulate. So we don't know, because we don't fly computers, exactly how fast they went. So when I said we went Mach 1.9, that was based on simulation. This is the red rocket, and the simulation you see was for a smaller 29-millimeter version that flies on like one of these Aerotech motors. And we flew this exact same rocket, but a different paint job with something this big. And that's the one that went that fast. The other thing that just came out in the last year that makes this interesting is these are single-use disposable engines from Aerotech. They, up until last year, you'd have to have a metal aluminum tube and a lot of hardware that, again, is expensive, you don't want to lose with each flight. And so it's nice that now they have single-use to make that whole concept of one-time rocketry. So taking that idea a step further, the next thing we're thinking about printing are rear-swept fins. And something I noticed in the desert is that anyone who's going like to 100,000 feet and they're trying to like get to space, they always put their fins, and at first I didn't know why, about this far off the bottom of the rocket and sloped up. And then I learned later why, is they actually bring them back down somewhere between 200 and 300 miles an hour and just let them slam into the playa. So even though there is a parachute, they want them, I mean, when you're going up, you know, and you're seeing the blackness of space, you want to come back in the same desert you launched from, they come back fast. And they had to be able to hit the playa and not rip the fins off on landing. And they actually figured out just the sweet spot for that. Now, if you print something, you can have rear swept wings that you intend to break on landing. Because the going up part doesn't stress the fins. The landing will break it, but that can be fine. So it's almost, I mean, it may sound non-environmental, but it's like disposable single-use fins. But when, again, it's less than $2 of material, you're going to spend much more than that and waste much more material using traditional methods. I'm starting to think that could be a good design. Because in rocketry, by the way, just in general, the more rear-swept your wing fins, the easier it will fly stably. And so you can have smaller fins, it'll go faster, higher. Everything works in your favor if the fins are far back, and you want nose weight as well. So, you know, a golf ball up front and rear-swept wings, we think we might finally break Mach 2 doing that. So here was one of our first flights with one of those sparky propellant motors out in Half Moon Bay with the intrepid flight crew on the left. These are video frame grabs. It just went so, it was just gone. And then out at Snow Ranch, it just happened to be random military dudes up there. I don't know why. You can get a sense, again, of scale. That little rocket, this is the one that went Mach 1.9, and the plume on the right. So the guy in jeans holding the camera took the photo on the right, because I was on the other side. And, I mean, that's a flame about that far coming out of the rocket. It flew straight as an arrow. Now, back to big stuff, and then on the SpaceX. Back in the desert, this was last summer, our largest motor yet, an O motor. And so folks that remember the Estes A, B, C, D motors, each one was roughly a doubling of total energy, total thrust, total impulse, if you will, that the motor can produce. So if you're getting to an O motor, which is about the same thrust as a cruise missile booster, they're in fact made by the same company, Cesaroni Aerospace in Canada. They sell them on the side. This is the 15th letter in the alphabet, so 2 times 2 times 2, 15 times 2 to the 15th power. That's 32,000 Estes A motors going at the same time in terms of effective thrust. This one was really fun in the video if you want to look for warped reality, GPS speaking, is it had an onboard system that sent GPS signals down in real time, and then a ground device translated into this really kind of interesting female voice that told you everything you wanted to know. Like your drogue parachute just came out, your main parachute is about to blow, and if you look 15 degrees off from north, because it knows where you are, you'll see it, you know, just off the horizon line. You're like, oh, there's the rocket, and then guide you to it. And I think that's kind of neat because you can imagine that if it goes wrong, she'd start screaming like, ah! There should be Easter eggs. I don't know if he's got Easter eggs in there to like surprise people if something really goes horribly wrong and sort of personalize that you have somebody on board. So other people have flown to great heights out there. These are not my rockets, but Gene Novacek from Alabama and Derek DeVille from Florida separately for these incredible projects that give you the kind of views you see there. That black was his Delrin housing for his camera melting over the frame, but if you ignore the black, you can see these are just amateurs, single individuals doing this in their garage, launching it out in the Black Rock Desert to incredible heights. I mentioned Rocket Mavericks. My friend Tom started this organization. You can see him at the top working with a bunch of kids in South Central LA and out in the desert where we launched this vehicle. This was when the PhoneSat reference you saw earlier comes from. And I love this quote from Arthur Clarke. It's in an obscure little book about Spaceship One, so most people haven't seen it, but he was celebrating in 2007 how Maverick pioneers with Spaceship One and with SpaceX and others that were just starting are doing great things, and Citizen Astronauts movement has begun. What's sad is he died just a few months later, and he actually never personally lived, well, he didn't live long enough to see SpaceX succeed in any of his launches, so it's a bit poignant. PhoneSat, yes. So this was that rocket launch event, the PhoneSat tethered to a balloon, you can see in the bottom right corner. this was this incredible thing that these NASA engineers figured out, is that a cell phone has more compute power and memory than most satellites in orbit, if not all of them. And part of the reason is Moore's law keeps improving. And if you have old technology and you want it to be rad hard and space qualified, and if you take a long time to do your designs, and if you want your satellites to stay in orbit for 10 years, maybe 15 on average, you're talking about an average of like a 10-year-old technology. And as an example of that, the Curiosity rover, the latest and greatest amazing rover on Mars, came down by the sky crane, we all cheered, I was at JPL cheering, has a 2-megapixel camera because it was in 2004 design freeze. 2004, 2 megapixels was state of the art. You can see how even if you just launch a new design every year, you're gonna get like a 10-fold, 10 years, meaning 2 to the 10th, 1,000-fold improvement in power just by riding Moore's law, with a doubling each year. So in any case, I met these people out here, and that was an astrobiology experiment on the left, but we accidentally compressed it into a small ball because the rocket came back ballistic. But the PhoneSat data survived, and they got data on how it could, in fact, survive the G's of launch. At NASA, they tested it works fine in a vacuum. Off-the-shelf phone works perfectly fine in a vacuum, works perfectly fine in space. And you can start studying soft error rates and other things that go on by flying one. And they have, by the way, since flown them. So let me, I'll try to wrap up. But the group that was out there have since launched a company called Planet Labs. And this was a little photo we took before they announced that they exist and before they'd even picked a company name. And that's not a model of their satellite, because when you see something that small, you think, oh yeah, it's like a 1 to 10 scale model. That is the satellite. It's 4 orders of magnitude cheaper than the equivalent traditional method. And their big insight was, if you're in photography, you know this, that buying a big telephoto lens is expensive and heavy. Like if I want to take a picture of someone in the back row and I use an 800 millimeter lens, that's going to be crazy expensive. My alternative is a smaller, cheaper, lighter lens and just get closer to my subject. And so their whole insight was just fly the satellites really close to Earth. They'll deorbit naturally. You point them straight down and put up hundreds of them instead of one, and raster scan the Earth. Have them go over the poles, so as the Earth spins, you cover the entire Earth and you image the entire planet every day. So every portion of the planet every day. They did that. The first image came down to the Stanford dish, and they now have their own ground stations festooned with their own art. And there we were receiving the first image. This was actually the first image. It comes from Washington, D.C. area. And what's amazing is if you compare it to the exact same part of Google Earth, which is a few months old on average, it's actually a few years old if you get outside of urban areas, there's already massive deforestation differences. So like the current data is very different from the past. So you could use these daily views to catch deforestation as it happens, catch illegal fishing as it happens, monitor crop health of every field, of every crop in the world every day. Which could be interesting information for a variety of agricultural uses and, of course, humanitarian uses as well. If there's a conflict zone or an earthquake somewhere you hadn't predicted, no one has eyes on things. They point satellites at stuff of interest. This just captures everything. They launched a flock of doves, as they call them, instead of, military sounds. They launched doves. And this actually is a real image, which you normally don't get to see of your satellites being deployed. And the sense of scale is kind of staggering. The solar arrays of the ISS and the Kibo module from Japan as they're launching the first 2 of their flock of 28 that they recently launched. They're going to launch 100 satellites this year, so they'll have more than anyone else combined. Their first flock image happened to be UC Davis, of all things. So let me switch one last thing, and then I'll wrap up. And yeah, I'll just wrap up with SpaceX. It's pretty amazing what they've been able to do and how many things worked the first time. And there's a bit of an analogy to maybe the democratization of matter, is that products are becoming software in many cases, right? Robots, drones, satellites, and rockets all come to mind, where there isn't a materials advance or even a subcomponent advance that really makes those marvels possible. And I think the same can be said for Tesla. It's a system engineering advantage and better software. In fact, SpaceX was the first company to use object-oriented software models when it added several months of delay in their first launch out of Cape Canaveral because NASA had never seen programming models where you might have 10,000 changes to your code from a month ago. And they just couldn't get their head around how to do software verification in modern methodologies. So there's a lot to be said for taking industries that had been historically pretty static because it was a physical innovation process, moving it to a software basis where the physical thing doesn't change much and the software just keeps getting better. And that allows you to simulate things, to be confident it'll work the first time, to be able to dock with the space station on the first attempt, to, as I'll show in a moment, use the landing legs for the first time and have them work perfectly. This was the test vehicle, a photo I took in Texas, I'll skip the Arthur Clarke quote. The only thing that's funny about it is he said, we've got to get reusable boosters. It's like essential to the future of rocketry. And he actually said that in July 1969 as Apollo 11 was on its way to the moon. And no one has really solved the problem until now. This just, for those who know, the last launch did something pretty remarkable. And I think Elon was pretty understated when he said, it wasn't a total success because we didn't physically get the booster back. We didn't find it. But, we didn't recover it before it sank. But what happened is these huge legs, you can see me next to one unpainted, that's carbon fiber leg, that's actually wide on purpose. 4 of them up against the body. What happened on the last launch is the booster comes up, the rest of the mission continues on. It turns around, lights motors, comes back towards where it came, flips around again, lights 3 motors, comes down over the ocean, because they, first attempt, who knows if it's going to work. By the way, uses the legs as an air brake on the way down. Comes back over the ocean, hovers for a bit, telemetry, all the data is like, yep, it's there, softly lands on the ocean. It takes about 8 seconds, and then it finally falls over, but then the water rushed in, and they didn't get it back. Had it been on land, it would have been recovered on the first attempt. Which is, again, the aerodynamics involved with that, which almost everyone else in the industry said was an impossible task, blows my mind that it worked the first time. Software and simulation is changing these industries. So I'll end with that. I'll end with an image of Mars, and this will be my last slide. Elon founded SpaceX with the vision that we're going to colonize Mars. And that is unabashedly the goal. And that is really kind of remarkable. And it's gotten me thinking about other companies that have insanely audacious long-term goals, then chain back to the present and think about what techniques and capabilities one might need to get there, and think of a breakthrough no one else would have bothered doing, like reusability of the booster. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of risk. You wouldn't do that unless you had to get to Mars. Or having the Dragon capsule land propulsively, because you might want to do that on Mars or the moon, not coming back by parachute. Those kinds of thoughts just wouldn't be there wouldn't be enough motivation if all you're trying to do is launch satellites into orbit. And so I'll just end with this, that dreaming big, thinking about Mars terraformed, as you see in the bottom right corner, is that star that motivates employees, of course, over there, and hopefully will inspire the next generation of kids to be really excited about math and science again, because the world of the future is going to be unlike any we've seen. Your chances to go to space are better than ever, because the longer you wait, the safer and cheaper it's going to become. So everyone in the room that's under 20, you can be flying in space, and in fact, I will too, but it might take a little more money because I'm going to have to do it sooner. The guys, as long as you drive safe, don't kill yourself in an accident, you'll be able to fly in space if you want to as an adult. Thank you.